This is a Niche Radio podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or log into www.nicheradio.co.za.
Welcome to SuperDads. Just to let you know that we are now also broadcasting on radio worldwide. So that's exciting. We get more listeners, more guests, and more excitement for you as the audience. So today's show is a bit different from our others. And our guest is actually, well, first off, a big thank you shout out to Vilma Miles from EMFs.co.za. She helped arrange our guest. And Vilma is a very convincing person. And, you know, persons that sometimes I try to get hold of and don't have success, she finds a way of using her charisma and charm on getting on the show. I don't believe it is the case with our guest. He is quite a very knowledgeable person. He is retired now and sort of, you know, enjoying a more quieter time of his life, spending time with his family. And yeah, let me say a bit about his background, and then let's see if you can actually guess who our guest is. Well, okay, I'm being silly because we're already going to have the picture on there of who our guest is. So we have Brian Stein here today, and he had actually a very successful early career in food manufacturing production. And when he became part of Sandwith Brothers, he was the chief executive, and he retired 6 years ago. And he grew the company from 100 million pounds turnover to 800 million with 7,500 employees. And what's very interesting and unique about today's show is that Brian's actually going to share with us his overcoming with electro-hypersensitivity and how he employed that in his personal life and his work environment, and him being at this age and being quite an influential man of handling such a large conglomerate of companies and an influencing market, how he actually managed to navigate and have this leverage to create a more safe environment. And that's why we have him as a super dad, because he went out of his way to do this. So Brian, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hello, good afternoon to you.
So let's, tell us where it all started. What got you into this, the original story and passion of non-native EMFs?
Well, I was running the company from about 1995. And inevitably, because it was businesses were dotted around the UK, you spent a good deal of time on the road in your car, and a lot of that time you felt guilty if you weren't in communication. So I would spend a lot of time in my car on my mobile phone. And in the mid-90s, late 90s, reception was generally speaking quite poor. So you would start off with it on hands-free, but invariably after a short period of time, you would then pick it up and you would have it to your head. And I spent, in total, I would guess, I was probably using a mobile phone for about 10 years. And for 9 years of that, not a problem, not an issue. And then in my last year of using a mobile phone, which was late 1999, 2000, I started to experience some quite weird sensations in my ear, specifically when on the mobile phone. And over a period of time, these sensations became more and more weird, and they became quite painful. And although I reduced my use of a mobile phone, I didn't stop, sadly. And I heard the Health Protection Agency in the UK saying it was perfectly safe, and any issues were purely temporary, nothing to worry about, perfectly safe, perfectly safe. And to some extent, I suppose I believed that. And then in September 2000, it was getting to the stage where the pain was becoming quite intense, and I couldn't bear to be on a mobile phone for very long at all. And I still didn't stop. And on this particular occasion, when I actually was taking a message from my mobile phone, and it felt almost as if my eardrum had burst. I've never had an eardrum burst, so I don't know what that's like, but the pain was excruciating. And that was in September 2000. And it was then a case of, okay, I'm a freak. Other people can use a mobile phone. I can't. I didn't know anybody else that had experienced what I'd experienced. And I swore then that I would not use a mobile phone again. Sadly for me, whatever damage had been done it was too late. And what I then found, and it was quite a scary experience, was that I was then starting to react to the dishwasher, to the washing machine, the television, in my car. And myself and my wife did a little bit of research and found that in Sweden there was quite a high population there who were electrically sensitive, and they explained about electrical sensitivity, and I ticked all the boxes, so it was quite clear to me exactly what had happened. But it wasn't a mystery. A lot of people, it creeps up on them and it's a mystery. With me, it wasn't. It was quite specific, so that when I put the phone to my head, pain. When I took it away, no pain. Pain, no pain. It was as dramatic as that. So I knew what was causing it, but I rather thought it was something to do with microchips as opposed to microwaves. So I was distancing myself from microchips for a period of time before I then began to realize it wasn't as simple as microchips. It was microwaves. And indeed, in my particular case, I think I was sensitive to the electricity, because I was then sort of finding I was having great difficulty sleeping. So I started to adapt my lifestyle. I had no choice in the matter. And I also had to adapt my lifestyle in work, because it was quite difficult in, I wouldn't say a high-tech industry, but the food industry is reasonably high-tech. And certainly I kept quiet about my condition for quite a period of time. Didn't particularly want to let people know, because I could have guessed the reaction of people. But for a period of time, when I had to stop using my car, I was driving around in a 7 Series BMW, which was probably the worst thing I could possibly do. It was so high-tech, it wasn't true. And it was affecting me quite badly. And it just so happened that my wife had just changed her car, and I was left with a small Nissan Micra to dispose of. And I thought, well, whilst I'm looking for a better car for me, I'll drive around in this Nissan Micra, and found very quickly that, one, it was fine for me, but as soon as I got anything like a modern car, it was a disaster for me. All my symptoms were coming back. So I then found myself travelling the length and breadth of the UK in a Nissan Micra, and it was fine. It was not an issue at all. But the people in the company were starting to panic somewhat, because they saw the chief exec driving around in a Nissan Micra, and they thought something was happening to the car policy, and all of a sudden they were all going to have to drive around in small cars. So I then had to come clean and explain to them that no, I wasn't looking to change the car policy at all, but I had become sensitive to microchips or whatever, and I had to drive an old car. So they then became more relaxed at that, but I then spent years and a lot of money trying to find cars that were suitable for me, and found it was virtually impossible. Or every other car I tried was causing me a major problem after a period of time. So I spent the next nearly 400,000 miles driving a little Nissan Micra, and I'm pleased to say it never let me down once.
Do you still drive the Nissan Micra, or have you got something different now?
Eventually it fell to bits, and I have the next model on of a Nissan Micra. But I spend most of my time in a more modern car where my wife drives and I sit in the back, and I find that if I can distance myself from the electronics, then I'm okay. But again, it's a car it's about 5 years old, so it's not ultra modern. There's no wireless in there. Oh, sorry, there's little microchips, there's little wireless, there's no Bluetooth, and I'm fine in the back. As soon as I get in the front, I start to get the same problems again.
Do you drive on the passenger side or driver side? You sit in the back, sorry.
When I sit in the back, I'm on the passenger side.
All right.
Don't ask me why.
I'll explain why. I'll explain why for our listeners. All right, so let's see the other question. So what are sort of the implementations you have done in your home or and your office in order to try and mitigate these things? Because that's quite different, I assume, in order to adapt.
Well, the first thing in work was to remove wireless from the head office. I also had to take out the heating and air conditioning system, which is electronic, which was affecting me when it came on. So I simply relied upon old-fashioned water radiators, hot water radiators, and windows in my particular office. I went back to an old-fashioned phone, an analog phone, and after a period of time found that basically what I was doing was using the phone as a speakerphone, not to my head, because the phone, even to my head, was causing me distress. And basically, I had a power switch in the room, so I could isolate the room completely from all electrics other than the phone. My secretary sat outside the office, so she did all my computer work, all my typing, etc., etc. And what I did for a period of time is if I was traveling around the country, I would stop, I would get into a payphone and take my messages to see if anybody required me urgently. And then I'd carry on driving and make communications when I got to the other end. And in my home life, what I did was, after a period of time of turning the electric off at night to sleep, and that helped me, I found that my wife was getting rather upset every morning when the deep freeze had defrosted, and she wasn't very happy. So after a period of time, I then arranged for a separate bedroom. I had it shielded, the windows made of K-glass, and an isolating switch for that room. So I was able to sleep totally isolated, floors, walls, ceiling, everything isolated. A semi-Faraday case, not 100% perfect, but it was enough for me, and it allowed me to sleep, and that aided my recovery.
And I assume also that you were recommended to be put on a very high dosage of supplements that sort of line up your kitchen table, or did you manage to avert that?
Well, no, I did that for about a year. I went to an environmental hospital who I saw made some great strides with people with food intolerance and chemical sensitivity. And the recommendation basically was, we don't know how to treat electrical sensitivity, but if we can try and remove any other environmental factors, it will help you. And I suffered with hay fever, so they certainly helped me with my hay fever. And I was taking, at one stage, probably about 100 supplements per day. And I tried that for about 10 months and then decided to stop because I didn't see that it was helping me at all. And the regime that I felt that I'd put into place was helping me. I knew what was causing it. I knew that the way to not cure myself, but to aid myself was avoidance. And by having strict avoidance, I was able to moderate and cope with my condition. And I did not come out with the customers. Having credibility with the customers was absolutely paramount to my job. I was dealing with the major retailers in the UK, and they trust or don't trust the head of the business. So at that stage, it was a case of keeping quiet about my condition. And it was probably not till 4 or 5 years later that I, having kept quiet about my condition, then went, I think, the first person in the UK to go live in the newspapers about being electrically sensitive. And I then had every newspaper and TV station in the UK wanting to interview me. And I did some limited interviews for 1 week. I gave 1 week of my time and then decided that's it. And stop doing them at that. And certainly it seemed to make some progress because at the start of my interviews, Jill Meara from the Health Protection Agency was saying this was all a load of nonsense. The second time she was on the radio, she was saying that, well, there was research going on. And the third time, she actually said we must help these people who are electrically sensitive. So I was able to retire from my media circus, thinking that the Health Protection Agency might actually help us. And the truth was that they realised that the only thing that they were possibly could do was to discredit us. Because if people are electrically sensitive, it is proof to the lie that EMFs don't cause health problems. And EMFs do cause health problems. And sadly, the people who are best able to advise on what should be happening, what problems there are people who are electrically sensitive. And that's the last thing they will do.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, a couple of those things are a bit tricky. I mean, when you retire from your work, was it voluntary, or was it sort of a pressure thing that because of your intolerance to radiation was creating a type of public difficulty for things?
No, I carried on working till my retirement age, and in fact I carried on working till 3 years after my retirement age. The reason for that was quite simply we were still training up my successor, and the business was growing topsy. I mean, if you work it out, we were a business of 100 million to 800 million. We grew the business by £250,000 per day for 17 years. So it was rather successful. So I was required to stay on, and on retirement continued as a consultant to the business.
And when you were doing this, did you also make certain implementations outside of your personal office in the work environment, or did other colleagues or employees sort of seek your guidance or input to sort of how to change their lives a bit, or was it just to kind of avoid the interest of it, or avoid talking to the boss because it's intimidating?
I think it was a case of picking my moments and my people to say things to when it was time and there might be some receptiveness. Certainly during my time there, I probably became a bit of a pain with one or two individuals, as I would try to encourage them to disconnect wireless, to reduce their use of mobile phones and hardwire everything. And this is a message that is quite difficult for people to take, because everywhere they look, they're told by the authorities it's perfectly safe. And indeed, in the UK, the stance has been it's not possible for this to cause you a problem. It's just not possible. No matter what the research says that it is a problem, we seem to be sort of post-research in this particular area of research, where the Health Protection Agency in the UK just ignores the research on the basis that it's not possible, it can't happen. So I pick my moments with people, and I think I've moderated one or two people's lifestyles where they have disconnected wireless at home, or where they turn wireless off at home. But sadly, I had a number of experiences where family and work colleagues, two of my directors, died of brain tumours. And the sad thing for me was, having been preaching to them, they got a brain tumour after they had, I thought, recovered. They were telling me they were on the mend, they were giving the all clear, the tumour had cleared up, and they were talking to me on their mobile phone. And I just sort of thought, obviously not had the impact I thought I would have. And 3 months later, the tumours were back with a vengeance, and a few months after that, they were dead. And it's a very powerful message when the Health Protection Agency, the government, all the pillars of establishment unite to say this is perfectly safe. It's not possible to cause a health issue. And if you go into hospitals, doctors who are treating people for cancer or dementia or whatever are not interested in the research, because they're too busy, and they're told by the government it's perfectly okay, don't worry about it.
No, I think, and that's what part of this show is vitally important, is that there is a strong degree of miscommunication in the realm. And even those that we want to approach, for instance, so that means, allopathic medicine or medical doctors, is that they tend to focus a lot on biochemistry. And this problem with non-native EMF is not a biochemistry problem. It's a physics problem. And because their background understanding doesn't involve physics, or they're not willing to learn the physics, therefore not able to understand how the physics relates to these biochemical or biological reactions. And therefore it's very hard for them to understand how to even interpret the data, how to do a study, or how to expand it on even further. So that's, part of those kind of things. In terms of, I mean, it's interesting that you're actually wearing a salmon shirt today. Do you often wear a salmon pink colors, or is that just the coincidence of today?
The coincidence of today, I have a number of pink shirts. I like the color pink.
Well, no, it's interesting, and actually links to how, to your intolerance with the radiation. So part of what in the show I do, or what I do with for clients, is that we do designing protocols for neurologists for their patients, helping them out. And there's all these different little niches things that happen in persons. And so my job is to connect the dots and use the physics and biochemistry and other aspects to help link them together. So if you want, as an experiment, we can kind of go through a couple of things regarding the information you've come with, and sort of design some adjustments that could make to help you out improve, if you like.
Fine.
It's very, very different to what our kind of show is. Another question I want to ask: the light bulb above your head that's shining on you, is that an incandescent bulb, or what kind of bulb is that?
Which one are we looking at? These are old-fashioned bulbs. They're not totally old-fashioned bulbs. They're incandescent, but they are more modern than I would like, but have not been able to change them. I tend not to use this room, and most of the bulbs we have around the house are old-fashioned bulbs. What I found on one particular occasion when I was standing at a lecture, I was leaning against a fluorescent tube, and after a short period of time, I found myself with an incredible pain in my neck where I was leaning against it.
Yeah.
So it taught me to keep away from the modern bulbs.
Well, yeah, so we'll cover that, because part of it on the interview as well, I can see your shoulders a bit hunched up, and I'm sorry that we're putting you through this inconvenience.
My chair's probably a bit too high.
No, but in terms of posture changing, these are things, this has to do with leaking light or photons in your vertebra at the top, at the back. So if one was to do an MRI image, they'd actually see this kind of leaking effect, because non-native EMF has the ability to break what's called covalent bonds. So that's part of the reason why in the environment, you're going to have these sort of adjustments or hunches. And what's difficult in the UK, and this seems also to be the pattern, I mean, we have in South Africa as well, but it's more of an association in the UK, is that because the electrical grid is 50 hertz, and that is half of the body's 100 hertz frequency. And because of that exact divide, there's more of this prevalence reaction with the EHS versus the United States. Them being on the 60 hertz, they don't have the low power frequency issue the same way that we would have in either of our countries. So what often happens is that, coming from your neck of the woods, is that, and that's why you had this experience with the fluorescent light. One is from the visible spectrum that's coming, but also from the magnetic field that's coming from it. And your reaction to it, because from fluorescent lights, this thing called the inverse square law, where we're told that the further distance away is going to dissipate. It's different for different magnetic sources. So with fluorescent light, it's actually a linear effect instead of an exponential, faster degradation. So that's why people tend to have a more closer relation of being affected when they are closer underneath to a fluorescent light. And there are some, adjustments we can do to that, which we'll cover. So it's just interesting to link those two together for you. And what you probably find, also especially being in the UK, your intolerance to the sensitivity was first more from the power grid, and secondly with exposure to artificial light, especially in your kind of work, there tends to be a lot more of a blue light spectrum. With the fridges, and again, fridges tend to have a very high, if it's not a gas fridge, it has a very high magnetic field coming off of it. And when you had the phone to your head, particularly the larger distances, people tend to negate that mobile devices, it's not just a microwave frequency, it actually gives off a very powerful magnetic field as well. So again, these different things are aggravating and dysfunctioning what's called your mitochondria within your system. So those things are continually coming with him to that effect. So, you know, and that's also probably why you found you had these type of mood disorders, you felt a bit more irritable, trouble with the hearing, makes you a bit more short-tempered or flustered. And I feel sorry for your wife, because my wife would have the same thing with me when I when I have an intolerable state. And, you know, as a father, it goes all the more reason why I'd have to do these different mitigation options and adaptabilities to improve my redox potential, so that I don't, you know, subject my children or family or myself to these type of effects. So that's why it's very important to do these different things. So in terms of you having the salmon shirt as well, that typically also happens a lot with persons that have a blue light toxicity. So I assume you also have sort of sensitivity to light. You like to wear sunglasses quite a lot outside. You might have a little bit of macular degeneration in the eyes, but I'm assuming it's more so light sensitivity. Am I right so far?
I don't think so, although I actually have had an operation on this eye for cataract, which I just wondered whether that was down to use, because whenever I used the mobile phone, it was always to this ear. This is where the cataract was.
Yeah. So again, what happens with the cataract? Cataracts is two things. The one thing is that the eye typically forms it to protect you from blue light. But with having the phone there, there's more disruption to the signaling path in the front of the eye. So that's why a lot of cases of cancer and whatnot associated with it. But what might be also an issue for you also further is, I assume you just got the standard lens implant and not the one made in Germany. Interesting how we talked about your surname origin, because the ones from Germany tend to allow UV light to penetrate through, where the new ones that have come through block all blue light completely and UV light. And that then leads to persons experiencing issues with diabetes and fatigue and those kind of issues. So something in the future to check up with your doctor, which one he sort of put in there. In terms of your driving with a car, I mean, this is a favorite one of mine. The number of persons, particularly doctors, they always love to have a thing of, I'm driving the greatest car and I want a Volvo, I want a BMW, and they get in it and they find that their health quickly depreciates, as you could say experienced. And what happens in these vehicles, particularly the modern ones, the highest EMF emissions, or where they put the antennas for the wireless and the different aspects, actually occurs underneath the driver's seat. And that's part of the pattern reason why you tend to avert and be away from your wife's side of the car and be more on the passenger side, in the back seat, in order to increase your distance away from that. So within vehicles, I mean, these modern vehicles, especially with having leather car seats, I don't know if you did put a grounding attachment to your vehicle.
No.
So yeah, so you have a thing called a grounding strap, which attaches at the base of the vehicle. And when you're driving on, tar doesn't work, but on the earth or concrete that's not chemical mixed, or grass, or those kind of things, your body is naturally getting these negative ions. And in the very beginning, I talked about covalent bonds being broken. So what that means is that in your cells, you have an electron and proton. And what happens is the non-native EMFs knock these electrons away from a proton. And you have this excess inflammation or this impact that's being happened. And your body tries to do all these feedback mechanisms, try compensate and correlate and all those issues. So while driving, if your car is grounded, it's even better if you have leather seats because you have more conductivity, is that you're able to actually gain these electrons from the earth that help restabilize your strength and ability with your intolerance to the radiation. Other people also then install negative air ionizers that just generate this negative ions in the air, sort of like in a way, a type of ozone, and that way you're getting more ions from that. And it's just another way of supplementing, getting these extra electrons in the system. But what happens, again, this issue is that, it's being in the UK, you're at a very high latitude. I assume are you in the northern or southern or middle parts of the UK?
Middle, not middle.
All right. So there you don't have necessarily the best sunlight or exposure to sunlight. And sunlight's a very key mitigation thing to it. I don't know if you intuitively tended to want to always take vacations to more tropical areas or towards the equator.
But travel is very difficult for me. I can't fly long haul.
Right. So that's something we can discuss another thing. But what you would probably benefit very well, I don't know if you ever heard of the special, well, you seem like you're a very knowledgeable person. You know about history quite well. There was that famous crater that knocked, the dinosaurs out and caused the whole new eukaryote production of people on the Earth millions of years ago. So that crater was what formed now the Gulf of Mexico. So for persons that actually have very extreme EHS or even cancer, just by them going, there's a couple in the UK actually that do it. They go for vacations to the special part of Mexico. And what happens is, it's not just a thing of you being close to the equator, so you're getting more sun, but your body is able to recharge because there's a different magnetic field on the Earth there compared to other parts of the world or the UK. We can see this on a NASA imagery map because it's closer to the volcanic magma. And what that magnetic field does is that it actually increases the spin rate of your mitochondria, which means your body is going from, in the case like you'll have your Nissan, turning into a Ferrari engine and becomes a lot more effective. And what happens is that persons that do go travel there, because they don't have this whole 4G, 5G, it's just 2G or 3G there. And within 3 days, their EHS is gone. They come back to the UK, they're flourishing, they're moving again, their intolerance is greatly improved, and they would take a trip there, a couple of times a year, if they're not doing certain hacks in their own environment. Again, it's not just the magnetic field, it's also the water there is different. You being in the UK, you have easier access to water from Budapest. It's like deuterium depleted. There's also Voss water from Iceland, again, deuterium depleted. And all these are just, I'm throwing words, these mechanisms that help improve what's called your redox potential, meaning your cells again go into this Ferrari engine, which is vitally important in this whole process. And it's interesting, like how you said that you have this dysfunction around heaters or these electric heaters. And it's a pity that, and also why you gravitate to the hot water heaters, is that hot water heaters do give off infrared light, which is quite therapeutic. But what you'll probably find, I don't know if you do find therapeutic, is to actually be around a fireplace, particularly in the evening.
Yeah, probably for psychological reasons.
Well, it's not just psychological. So what happens is that there's a part of medicine called light medicine or photobiomodulation medicine, where they put like a mobile cranial device on the head and emits a red and infrared light. And it's very successful with Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, dementia. We actually have one of the articles on our site about it and on the companies. And it shows a massive improvement in the brain structure. And now these devices cost more for the average person, but a free source of it is not only the sun, but also a fire. Just being close to a fire and that effect creates these regenerative properties on the head. So the mind is able to flourish a lot better. So probably what was also different between you and your friends that died of tumors is that you went out of your way and intuitively did certain things to actually help make you better or survive better compared to others. But I understand, like you said, you spend lots of money going from different left, right, and said Fred kind of clinic or person, and even building biologists. And because they don't understand EMFs properly themselves, even though they're there to consult, they sent you on a wild train ride. I mean, it's even this whole thing of multiple chemical sensitivity. It's the exact same thing as EHS. There's no difference. And the treatment protocol is the same.
That is the case. And you find certainly I've experienced a lot of chemically sensitive people that eventually become electrically sensitive.
Yeah, so
the mechanisms are very, very similar.
Well, it's exactly the same. Even when we look at the genetic profiles and the blood analysis and the biomarkers, all those things, exactly the same. And the treatment protocol also is exactly the same. So, I mean, you'll probably find even a person that went to, say, in Mexico, this more special area, there's a nice vacation resort and a beach. And afterwards, they're able to go into their home filled with mold and not be affected. Again, that's got to do because we're improving the redox potential. What that means is that the body is naturally able to handle environmental contaminants. Now, the problem with the UK is that everyone's trying to roll out 5G now. And that makes things a lot more difficult because, your house has to be built differently, your plans have to be done differently, and all these different type of what we call mito hacks have to be done differently. But there are important ways, and thankfully you are more fortunate sort of on the income scale of being retired and more free with your time for recovery. So that's the good news with for you. In terms of lighting, the lights above you, I assume, do you actually get up in the morning for the sunrise?
Or is it probably after sunrise?
Yeah. So what you'll probably find, I know maybe it might seem too conservative for you, but going outside in the sun and having as much exposed skin, or if you can be naked, or in the UK, there's a brand called Kaniki. They sell these bathers that allow UV sun to penetrate. And being in the sun, on the grass and just standing there and taking the sunrise will already make a much profound impact on your recovery and strength, because it's a thing called involved in chronobiology. There was a Nobel Prize for it that was given out last year in the field. But in that same aspect in your house, that I know, like I said, you have this issue with the fluorescent lights. But if you were to install, I don't know if you've seen these things called UVA bulbs, or those black lights that used to be in your 60s, 70s, those parties you went to, the clubs. So having those on in your home during the day, particularly, actually will help counteract a lot of that negative effect. And you should feel a lot more, less pain and more energized, because it boosts your beta endorphins. It helps you concentrate a lot better. You're getting UVA, so for your vitamin A. So those are just some of those basic quick nutshells, kind of adjustments for our listeners there. And maybe you can try some of them.
The problem sometimes with them is that sometimes people think that can cure them or help them, and misses the point about avoidance, because it's no good going to the equator if there's a mass nearby. Because I found myself going to a lovely climate and in a house where there was contraptions emitting EMFs that made me quite ill. And all these things can have marginal differences, improvements. And if you end up near a mast or in a Wi-Fi environment, it negates them all. The most important thing is avoidance.
I will disagree with you there. Avoidance, yes, is a key thing. It is important, because if you cannot change the environment, you are not going to get better. However, with this part of Mexico, it's not just a thing of it's the closer to the equator, you have a different magnetic field and different water there. So NASA, when they look at for life on different Earth, they look at what if there's enough light, what's the magnetism levels on the planet, and what is the water like in order to sustain life. So it's about a combination of things that enables you to recover and deal better with the environment. So that's why for very sensitive EHS persons like yourself, even though they go to say this hotel resort that's nearby, and there's cordless phones, decked phones, there's 2G there, 3G there, and they're able to tolerate it, no problem. They don't feel that same kind of pain and issue. And the difficulty thing here is that, particularly with that kind of pain, I understand, I've been there, is that when talking about the physics and science never helps. One always has to experience it to believe it, and that's true for everything. So I assume maybe because you're close to your neck of the woods, there's a guy named Wim Hof, or the Wim Hof method. It's called also the Iceman. He broke the Guinness Book of Records for being in ice for the longest period of time. So it's something one of the things sort of teaching here in South Africa is teaching cold thermogenesis, or cold therapy exposure, because by being in that cold water, particularly the ocean, just by persons feeling that and how it's different with the sunlight and different aspects, then one is able to question, understand, okay, what are the physics involved? And then they're able to understand, okay, this is what changes to it. But you're absolutely correct. If you're in not an optimal environment and you're going back to doing these practices that overwhelms what your body can do, you're not going to get better. And that is 100% correct with your key message in the beginning, is that It's about having a corded phone, about having a different kind of lighting, about not using your cell phone to your head, because those things are going to put you to the state where you have irreparable damage. And that's why we have the technical classification between, you have EHS and EMFIS. And EHS, many people actually have it. So tendinitis is EHS. It's an allergy to the EMF. Diabetes is EHS. Cardiac AFib is EHS. So all these names, again, doctors don't really understand until you explain to them the physics, and then they understand how they're the same thing. But when the sensitivity leads to a state, like with you and you had that pop and that severe pain in your ear, and it's irreparable damage, then you go into the category of electromagnetic field intolerance syndrome, meaning that your body cannot go into that point of extreme adaptation. And that's where, like you said, it's the thing of avoidance, but finding other ways of having this adaptation or adaptability to your new environment, which is it's unneeded, it's unfortunate, but that's the purpose of the show here. For Super Dads, it's persons like yourself. You have a position of power, you had a position of directorship, and you went out of your way to try create a more protective environment. Yes, it's not your job to force people to do certain things if they don't want to, and they, like you said, died of the tumors. But the point is you tried, and the most important person to protect was yourself. And it's a big salute to you that you actually took that step to protect yourself first, because that way you could protect your wife, your family, your children, and your employees. Because if you didn't take those steps, then your company would not have grown as it did from year to year.
The worry that I have sometimes when I often think, if somebody came along and was able to hypnotize me and not be electrically sensitive, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Because my body is telling me something. It's telling me to get out of the way of something. And the worry that I have is when I look at the latest research, be it in cancer, the NTP studies recently, the Ramitsani studies, it's clearly showing that rats are getting cancer. These are not electrically sensitive rats per se, although all animals are electrically sensitive. They're simply exposed to EMF fields and getting cancer. And I think the danger is sometimes, well, okay, we can do some of these avoidance things, but is our not showing those intolerances helping us not to get cancer?
Well,
because the truth is, the EMFs cause cancer, they cause senile dementia, they cause all the things that you've just described, absolutely 100%. And if we protect ourselves by, as I said, hypnotizing ourselves that we're no longer electrically sensitive, does that actually protect us against cancer and senile dementia? I don't think so.
Correct. I mean, number one, hypnotism won't actually work. Although we do try to mask the pain that's why you have such a strong opiate crisis now, with dopamine levels dropping and as a result, diabetes also popping up with that whole chemical exchange. So it's only, and that's also this argument that comes with a lot of these devices people like to sell, like the stickers on the back of a phone, because what happens is by trying to suppress or mask the biological reaction, this happens with also psychiatric medications or pain medications, is that the body has multiple feedback and backup repair processes. And it's just going to go to the next one that's going to be dysregulated and poorly function. And what you'll see is a person, like you said, they'll still get cancer, or they'll still have some other ailment, or they'll become obese, or they'll have the diabetes, or the neurodegenerative diseases. So the body is constantly communicating that it has to find a way to get out. And even for people of faith, I mean, they want to talk about how light is God and God is light. And this relationship of, God wants you to connect with nature, wants you to be the best of yourself. But if you're constantly going to avoid that connection or communication and disinhibit it, then you are going to be cast out from protection, as some would call it. So, what you're saying is vitally important, is that it doesn't help to try, find a way. And I guess, it's the crutch of us as human beings. We tend to want to do this thing of, I want to stay where I am and not move and not change. I don't know if in the past you ever got to travel to Africa or to see a safari.
I went to South Africa once and enjoyed the wonderful scenery there.
And have you maybe seen the movie The Lion King?
Yeah.
All right. So in the movie, they also talked about the wildebeest and how the wildebeest sort of have this migration. And wildebeest, they're not the most intelligent of animals, right? But they work with numbers and they do this herding effect. And what happens is with them is that they do one of the biggest migrations in the world from one side of the Nile to the other. And sort of it's interesting to actually discover or understand, why do they migrate? So yes, there is the thing of, the seasonal changes of summer, winter, spring, autumn, and fall, and how the solar latitude changes slightly. What actually tells them it's time to migrate is the grass changes during the photosynthesis process, where there's a higher level of deuterium in it. And what happens is when this deuterium grass goes into the gut of the wildebeest, is that on the surface line of it, there's a thing, enterocytes, whatnot, they get agitated. And the wildebeest get a bit of a tummy ache or a belly rumble. And they then are given this clue that, okay, the environment is no longer good for us. And they go on this massive migration to the point where, crossing the Nile, there's crocodiles there, a good number of, I'd say about less than 100 or something of the wildebeest get taken out, eaten by the crocs. But the millions of them move and they survive. And what's important and key of this communication is that, our effects that we're having from the non-native EMF is that it's telling us that the environment is not good for us and that we need to either move for survivability or we need to change the environment for our survivability. And that again ties to what you were talking about earlier about how doing the shielding or actually, cutting off certain things is going to enable, to change that environment for you.
Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned earlier regarding your bedroom. So you installed a kill switch there, or you just don't have any electricity in there?
Yes. So at night time, I can kill the electricity, have no electricity in there at all. And I found that was in the early stages when I was very, very bad and was unable to sleep properly. It helped enormously. All of a sudden, I found that I could sleep.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if you don't have sleep, but then all the symptoms you have just get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, it links to melatonin. Melatonin is a very powerful antioxidant. It links to your vitamin D. Again, this Nobel Prize of chronobiology from last year explains a lot of it now proven in science for persons. So what you probably find is since that paper was or award was given, there were some other previous ones as well, all linking to these issues of non-native EMF. There seems to be a much more greater conscious awareness of the topic, and particularly now with 5G coming out, there's more of this uproar and this objection to it from the masses and the media because of more of these proven non-negotiable stuff proven in science.
I think sadly that's not happening in the UK. There seems to be a blackout on news in the UK. So even though the NTP study has been partially published and the Ramazzini study, there's been no comment at all in the British press. Whether that's because the government are just about to start selling off the 5G licenses and will probably net in £15 billion, I don't know. But certainly you see in other countries now, in some countries, on the west coast of America, there is now much more of a debate going on because they've been installing smart meters and a whole host of people have become ill. So as soon as the debate starts to be generated, I think that you can convince people that there might be a problem. If you're not allowed to communicate by the newspapers or the media, then it's very difficult to convince people because all the messages they're getting all the time is about how wonderful this technology is. And I think there's a lot of countries like the UK, and I'm pleased we're now starting to see in places like India, China, and Russia, where they no longer tolerate ICNIRP standards. They've introduced their own standards, and they recognise in those countries that EMFs cause cancer. So it's quite strange that in half the world, EMFs cause cancer. In the other half of the world, it's not possible. It can't happen.
Yeah, I think also with the whole cancer thing, I mean, unfortunately, it's a very hot topic word that's also, again, part of the whole echo chambering of it. And, you know, with the cancer, yes, there was a recent CDC announcement where it's much higher in the rates with children under the age of 20, you know, particularly the thyroid areas. And again, all these areas are related to the mitochondria and biggest effects from non-native EMF. But again, there seems to be more of this unfortunate gravitation to the word cancer. And, you know, I found, particularly with my consulting or my presentations, it's a lot easier to communicate with the masses when you talk about the issues of obesity or diabetes or thyroidism issues. Because for them, it's a much more easier, oh, this affects me personally, I want to do something about it. When people talk about cancer, it's seen as this, oh, we don't really want to talk about it, or it's too emotional or difficult. So from my interpretation, this purely my personal viewpoint, is that, again, it's another one of those things where industry purposely funds the echo chambering in the media on the word of cancer in order to enable or maintain lobbying and discommunication or misunderstanding by the public.
I'm sure you're right. However, at least we have an organisation that reviews the research on cancer and can then make a statement as to whether this research is good, valid or not. And so EMFs are now a 2B carcinogen. The problem we have with other research, there's no body to review all that research and say, this is good, this is bad, this is probably what is happening. So you're left to your own devices and your own emotions to believe whether it's causing obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes and whatever. At least with cancer, there is a body reviewing it all. I just wish there was another body like IARC reviewing senile dementia and obesity to look at all the research and then to try and open up the debate about what this research is saying, because we don't really have that.
You know, I agree. In a way, it is important, but that they're politicians, and to be honest, they're going to do nothing about the problem, and that's just because of how politics is arise. And politics or government is not there to protect the public. When we look at the definition of the dictionary, it is there to facilitate discussions amongst the people. So that way, you know, the only way it's going to change is by you changing yourself like you did, and persons that, as you were in your employment, in your position of power, that's able to implement these subtle implementations. Again, that's what the Russian government has done. They have a very good physics training program. They have different implementation standards, but they're not doing this whole media thing of, okay, let's try do this awareness thing. We just implement practices where it is going to be done a certain way. So in your, if we use the example of your business you're running, is that it didn't have to necessarily just be the thing of in your office. You could have changed the lights, or you had the power to change the lights in your entire facilities. You had the power to have everything land cabled. You had the power to, because you're renting land or you had property portfolios, to not actually have cell phone towers nearby, not having to have Wi-Fi, to not have blue lit screens or blue lights, to have different types of technology or wiring installed to cancel out.
But if you do those things without the basis of science, you're an eccentric. The whole idea is that you do these things on the basis of science. So that's very, very important as we go forward, I think, that we get recognition that science is on our side, because I think it is. And you say that that's not important. I think I would argue it's going to become increasingly important for the simple reason that I don't think, the politicians I'm sure think there's a problem, but they can hide it. And the economy is so important that this little issue that they have with electrically sensitive people is too small to be even bothered with. If you look at the research coming out simply on cancer at the moment, you're looking at enormous levels of cancer. You're looking at illnesses of the scale of tobacco. And if that's true, which I think it is, what you're going to see, and it's starting to happen in the UK and in America, longevity going backwards. And in the UK and America, nobody can understand how that can happen. So America, they're putting it down to drugs, and in the UK, they're putting it down to obesity. And in the UK, they'll put it down to anything other than EMFs. But if you actually look at the NTP study and the Ramazzani studies, you can actually see why this might actually be happening. And when enough of our children are dying of cancer, somebody will start to take notice. I think it's a horrible thing to say, but we probably need that epidemic of cancer for people to wake up to what is happening in our society, where we're no longer looking at the science because it's not convenient. We've got to look at the science. And then, man's quite ingenious. Once he recognises he has a problem, he could bring an awful lot of power and money to bear to solve that problem. Whilst he's in denial, he puts no money towards solving the problem. As soon as we get some recognition in the Western countries that this longevity issue is going to get worse, and it will, and it might be being caused by EMFs, we will try to change the technology. And I don't know how that will happen, whether it'll be light technology that will solve the problem or not, I have no idea. But all I know is once we recognise there's a problem, the amount of resources that will go into solving that problem will one day solve it, rather than have more and more of our children dying of cancer and more of our middle-aged people, not old people, dying of dementia, because that's what's going to happen.
No, you're correct. The good news is with this rollout technology is that it makes the epidemic a lot more clear and more understandable. Especially with the whole 5G, it is more complicated because 5G between each cities is not going to be the same. And that's given the topography and the environment. So what makes it more difficult is that the type of diseases manifesting or erupting stronger is different. So it's harder for clinicians or functional medicine doctors when they are sitting around a table trying to discuss the matter and they're seeing all these differences and not sure how they're related because they don't understand the physics again. I just said earlier, if you're going to implement this in a company, you have to understand the science or have a consultant that actually understands the science and not just taking you for a ride on your money. And that's even like building biologists. They don't necessarily understand this link of the physics to the biology, because with this rollout now of 5G and also from 4G, it's no longer a power density issue. It's a spectrum issue to the biological aspects of the body.
Absolutely.
And also the same thing is with, there's going to be a high epidemic now of more shootings, especially with kids, more depression, more suicide. And that seems to be more of a link to it. And when it comes to countries like yours that have this national health insurance fund, and South Africa is trying to also roll out the same thing. When we're looking at the clinical data and we're plugging into modeling, the rollout of 5G is going to show those health insurance programs becoming bankrupted.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
And it's scary, but again, it's difficult because it works well for industry, because you have these very weird studies going to be coming out and have more of this issue of trying to see a correlation, because allopathic medicine or algorithmic medicine wants to do it in a certain structure and not apply this non-linear analysis. So it's going to support industry even further. But like you said, the good thing is, like you mentioned earlier, it's with the politicians or these review committees, is once there's enough persons on the street voicing out and wanting to take it up and demand this protection mechanism, then it becomes more of an outcry requirement to change the public policy.
Yeah. Yeah, and sadly, it has to be a disaster before we do that. We tend to ignore the research showing cancer and wait until it actually happens before we actually do something about it, which is rather sad, particularly for those people that end up dying because of cancer.
Well, it's true. I mean, if we talk about people and our brains not being as functional in comparing to the wildebeest again, is that if us, the wildebeest, choose not to migrate or be more intelligent of our environment, we're going to get taken out by the crocodiles. And it's a normal thing with Darwin, it's evolution, and it happens. But the ones that are more aware and learning, and like the listeners in our show and yourself and the way you're having impact on people, it's only going to show who's going to become the more evolutionary species, and then thereby the more evolutionary policy. We just always wish it would happen overnight and not this, decades kind of process, or years. But we do our best to employ these mitigation options so that we can survive the process to the next evolutionary stage. I don't know if I'll be there. We'll see.
Well, likewise, I constantly hope that one day there's some recognition for this condition, because life becomes more and more difficult. Okay, some people maybe can go to Mexico, but most people don't want to. They want to still remain with their family. And whilst they put wireless in virtually every building in the UK, every single hospital has Wi-Fi. Every single school now has Wi-Fi. So in my particular case, when I had colon cancer, they wanted to remove a third of my colon. And I said, fine, if you can give me a Wi-Fi ward, with no Wi-Fi, that's okay. They couldn't. So in the end, I had to not have the operation and have it monitored. And as you get older, that is going to be quite an issue for people. They can't go into a hospital in the UK because 100% of them are wireless.
Oh no, hospitals can be some of the worst places. I mean, I even have some of the doctors here that want. Again, it's difficult because some of the doctors and even other health wardens want to use my work to redesign the wards, like the ICU ward and the neonatal ward. But it's difficult in that, especially in the one case, it said if law doesn't mandate them to do it, then the directors don't want to spend the money. So it's challenging in that aspect. But again, you have persons that do have better sway, and as time's going by, there is better leverage to implement these changes and adjustments to it. And there are ways where you can sort of have Wi-Fi in a hospital, but adjust certain things so that it can be mitigated or adjusted for those other persons. So at least the good news is there. And that's also why persons have to unfortunately go to the courts, because the courts enables the use of an impartial party or a judge typically. I mean, I myself have been in different courts and demonstrating successfully that non-native EMF has a biological capacity. And from, our laws based on sort of, it's very similar to the UK law. So from my experience here in South Africa and what's done, I don't see how it's also too much of a far-fetched that the same type of stuff can be employed in the UK. And by that means one can have these forced changes to be a lot quicker than trying to go through a parliament.
Yeah, but the problem is the UK has lots of soft powers. So it's very difficult to change things when the government is very anti something. So even in the courts in the UK, where there has been one or two instances of somebody seriously electrically sensitive trying to apply for a mast not to go up, the court ruled that the mast would go up, and the costs of, I think it was like £500,000 were awarded against the couple. So at this moment in time, the odds are stacked against you, and that's the soft powers that exist in a country like the UK, where I suspect at very high levels, people have decided that EMFs cannot harm you, nobody can be electrically sensitive, and that's filtered down to all the organisational bodies. So even when we had the silly case in the UK, one of the papers that reported on the NTP study, the report actually said in the paper, proof that EMFs do not cause tumours. Now, the report says they do cause tumours, and when I complained to the Press Complaints Committee, they ruled against me on the basis that Cancer Research UK said it was unlikely and somebody else said it was probably not possible. So they ignored the research and went to other people who were able to say it was probably not true, to justify telling the general population that a research paper that says it causes tumours doesn't cause tumours. And that's difficult to get past.
No, it requires strategy. It requires good ammunition and good understanding, and understanding the science. Because like as you saw in the beginning, with trying to implement changes in your office, if you don't understand the science, you're trying to implement stuff, then you end up telling a half-truth. And when a half-truth is being told, it ends up being a lie. And so the issue is that the message then becomes sounding like pseudoscience. So how are you different to any other person on the web? So, part of this show, and it's a series that takes time, is to have the audience learn the science in order to survive, increase the survivability. Because survivability is not just about shielding, it's about engaging with community, engaging with your courts, engaging with your municipalities and your Congress powers on how to explain, discuss the story so you don't have this issue of other higher parties. I've been fortunate getting reviews of my research from different organs of state. And, the one organ keeps, like you said, says, well, we don't want to have a change in policy because it can create a communication issue. But, with the leverage that's coming from the work associated with me is that is going to probably change very quickly. But then once it happens, how do you do the next steps afterwards? And that's, again, becomes another story in a process. So yeah, it's exciting. It's great. It's just unfortunate for, a person like in your experience to have gone through the years of the battery and the difficulties, and it's very tiring. It's very weighing on everyone. And all one wants to do is just leave me alone. Let me enjoy my life. And I don't want to get involved in this too much more. I've done what I've done, and enough is enough. And people have to respect that.
The bigger problem is, though, that I'm in a relatively fortunate position, as you said. I live in a reasonably isolated spot, and I have sufficient funds to be able to control my environment to a limited extent. The people that I'm trying to help in the UK don't have those resources. They live in a block of flats. They have somebody above them, below them, beside them with wireless and Wi-Fi, and they don't have the money to move.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult for those people to improve their lot and to improve their health when that's what they're living in. And the authorities and the local councils are saying, well, we can't rehouse you. You're imagining this. It's all in the mind. And they're the people that I feel sorry for.
Oh, no, it's painful. It's difficult. But again, like I said, the good thing with the show I have, and there's other people out there learning, it's like a wave in physics. The idea of it is that you have a tsunami, it's a small ripple effect, and then it starts spreading the message, and it can have a very profound impact on the environment, either changing the topology of the environment geographically quite substantially. So that's the point of, and the value of having you as a guest on the show, to have our listeners more aware of it, and for you to actually share the message and whatnot, so they can be better aware of what can be done and how to learn more, so they can change themselves and their environment despite those circumstances. Because to say they can't move, I get it. People won't be bullies, but if it's really important, one does find a way. And sometimes it can take a year or 2 years, but one can find a way.
I'm sure that's true, but I think most people who are electrically sensitive will probably be trying to find a way through for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And one day, one or two of the public. I think the truth is that you said it earlier on, that people believe these things when it happens to them. And sadly, I think that more and more of our politicians or royal family or celebrities need to become electrically sensitive before this becomes real.
Well,
what I'd like to do is put a mast in the House of Commons transmitting it just below the ICNIRP guidelines for a year and see how many politicians still think it's safe.
Well, interesting. Even in Geneva and WHO, the World Health Organization in Geneva, their levels they have there is drastically different to what's in other areas, where it's actually much, much lower. So, in the areas that actually do have, in the United States, it's more common where, particularly I assume also in parts of the UK, where wealthy areas don't like the whole thing of when fiber optic needs to be installed, and there's this trudging up of the paving and construction. And what happens then is that there's this rollout of 5G or super high wireless in the area to overcome not digging up the roads. And what you find is that because 4G and 5G has this thing called jump conduction, is that people start having a sort of a static shock effect when they're touching the balustrade, or driving in their car, their phone, they have like a small shock effect, or they have their severe headaches. And very quickly thereafter, more so in the United States, those systems are taken down within a few months. And then they go back to a different type of rollout. But it's, like I said, they first had to experience a pandemic before there's this change. And I guess maybe with the UK, I don't know, I don't live in the UK, but there's always this ideology of, being more posh and more prim and proper, and you just don't say certain things or communicate certain things. And it seems like these complaints of health from the non-native EMF seems to be one of them.
Well, I think you described it before. It's so confusing. It does cause so many different illnesses that it gives the Health Protection Agency the argument to be able to use it. Look, they're blaming everything on EMFs. Well, that might be because EMFs affect the whole of the body, but they use it to ridicule people. They blame their tinnitus on their EMFs and their high blood pressure on EMFs and their cancer on EMFs. Yes, they do, because it causes all those things.
And it's also difficult because of the discrimination of literature. So, in the beginning, you're talking about how it was your cell phone and, talking about the wireless, but in reality, in the beginning, it actually was more so the magnetic fields and the blue light. And so literature tends to not, or I say it can either be one or not the others, or we don't want to talk about magnetic fields from a media point of view, or we don't want to talk about the visible spectrum and include that. And again, it's about all of them working together in combination. And that again creates even more confusion. So it's difficult, the more people become disconnected with nature, to better understand this aspect. So, let's try be one of those connected wildebeests as we migrate through nature. So Brian, closing off, any final advice being a dad? So how do you handle this with your own children in sort of educating them or protecting them and your grandchildren?
Constantly nagging them. They all claim that they rarely use their mobile phones and they only put their wireless on as and when it's needed. And I'm sure with one or two of them that's probably true, but one or two is probably not true. So you have to keep nagging them, and every so often you make yourself very unpopular by giving them a couple of pieces of research that just come out, which sometimes they're not too keen on reading. But it's as drip, drip, drip all the time, just trying to remind them that you can affect things and you can affect your grandchildren, because, from the minute they're born, a lot of children now being born into a wireless environment. Those people are going to be sufferers in their 20s and 30s in years to come. It's better to take a positive approach to mitigate against it where you can, because one day this will become common knowledge.
Well, maybe your kids can listen to the recording of the show, and maybe some of the information discussed will plant a few seeds for them.
Yes, I hope so, and I hope that the show is going out and being received by doctors and medics and scientists so that they can open their eyes a little bit more.
Well, with the medical profession, from my experience, is that first the doctor has to have their own personal body failure before they're actually able to make the change. And the trouble with training in medicine, particularly those environments, is that how it affects the dopamine in the brain or in the frontal lobes is that it makes them low dopamine assholes, and they don't want to listen or believe or trigger out because the brain is infected in such a way that it's not capable of doing that. So once they have this mega crash with their own failure and they're taking time off in a different environment or they're desperate, they tend to reach out, and that's what I'm helping them with their own personal issues, that by making these adjustments, they then become better physicians afterwards, because they're understanding how they're changing themselves, and they're able to then advise it to their patients. But like I said, it's not just a thing of like, I have one doctor where he says he has patients going in the ICU. By the third or fourth visit, are they then only willing to listen to him on, okay, let's attend to this and make some changes in the life. But three visits to the ICU is quite a lot. And that can happen over a span of 1, 2, or 3 years.
Well, I used to attend a medical every year, because of my employment with my death in service benefit and whatever. The insurance company made me have a medical each year. And I made sure that I told people the truth, that I had my medical, and I mentioned to each doctor each year that I was electrically sensitive, and they sort of looked at me rather strange and then just carried on and ignored it. And it wasn't until my last medical, before I did retire, that the doctor actually sort of looked at me and then was puzzled and said, well, explain a little bit more. And I explained a little bit more. I said, well, why do you want to know? He said, I've started to notice that I keep my mobile phone in my top pocket. And when I have my phone in my top pocket, I'm starting to get heart palpitations. And I said, well, that's what happens to me. That's what happens. There's quite a bit of research and, it's real. It's not imaginary. What do you do now with your mobile phone? Well, I put it in my trouser pocket now.
So you're going for pancreatic cancer as well?
Absolutely.
Or what you get, if you see your physician, that same physician again, you can actually mention to him, he probably has a device in his office where it measures the magnetic field coming from the heart. So the heart isn't actually a muscle or a pump, it's a magnetic generator. And there's a medical device that's used to actually measure it from many meters away, the strong magnetic field. So it will make better sense for him to understand, right, my heart has a magnetic field and the blood is what's called paramagnetic. That's how it's able to move. And by putting the phone in there that's giving off another disruptive magnetic field, he will be able to maybe have a better understanding of why it's the issue. But you can also ask him when he's going for his next pancreatic cancer checkup, because that's sort of how Steve Jobs went.
Absolutely.
Brian, thank you so much. That's been a very colorful story. I enjoyed all the different nuance, the different adjustments. It was actually quite interesting, quite a different interview to what I've normally been having. Sorry for going a bit, if you've been too personal on your space, but you seem to be quite the experienced person. And by sharing on this experience, I think it's been able to be a lot easier for others out there to relate to it.
I hope you're able to spread the message far and wide. Thank you.
For more, visit www.nicheradio.co.za.